I noticed something was wrong the moment I stepped onto the front porch. The air had that strange, unsettled stillness, like a room that's been cleaned too quickly or a door left open just a little too long. My son's house usually carried the sounds of life, a cupboard closing, my grandson's laughter bouncing through the hallway, even my daughter-in-law's sharp voice drifting around like cold wind. But that morning, everything was silent, too silent. I set my cane against the railing and wiped my shoes on the mat, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and something else, movement perhaps, the muffled scrape of furniture. I hesitated, one hand on the doorknob, feeling a heaviness in the center of my chest. An old man's intuition is rarely wrong, and mine was rattling like a loose window in the storm. Still, I opened the door. The living room looked wrong. Not messy, not chaotic, just wrong. Like a stage where someone had moved all the props but left the backdrop untouched. The first thing I noticed was that my reading lamp was gone from the corner. A small thing, but it left a shadow behind. A lamp-shaped absence that made the room feel unfamiliar. My favorite blanket, the one my wife knitted during her last winter, wasn't folded on the sofa where I always left it. The coaster I carved from red oak wasn't on the coffee table. Small absences, little silences, all building. "Hello?" I called. No answer. I walked slowly toward the hallway, my steps echoing in the unnaturally tidy space. My son's boots weren't by the door. My grandson's backpack wasn't slumped against the wall. Even the faint trace of the cinnamon air freshener Lindsay always used had been replaced by the sterile scent of lemon cleaner. A bad sign. I reached the guest room, my room, and stopped dead in the doorway. Empty. The bed was gone. The dresser was gone. The nightstand, the curtains, the framed picture of my wife, the little wooden box where I kept the watch my father left me. Every trace of me had vanished. My heart thudded once, hard and heavy. Then again, stronger, like it was trying to push its way out of my chest. I stepped inside, the floorboards creaking beneath me. I turned slowly, as if the walls might offer an explanation. But there was nothing. Nothing but a faint rectangle on the carpet where the bed had been. I opened the closet. Empty. My shirts, my jackets, my neatly folded trousers, gone. I whispered to no one. "Where did you put me?" A shiver went through me, not from cold, but from the sudden sense of displacement. Like I had been erased from the house entirely. Like someone had decided I no longer belonged here. The silence thickened around me, pressing against my ears. Then, from the kitchen, a sound. A door closing. Soft, but deliberate. I followed it slowly, past the freshly disinfected counters and the spotless sink, through the mudroom, until I reached the garage door. My hand hovered over the handle. Something inside me resisted opening it. Something old, something instinctive. But I had to. I needed to know how deep the disrespect ran. I opened the door. The smell hit first. Dust, motor oil, damp cardboard. The garage was dim, lit only by 2 narrow windows near the ceiling. But even in the low light, I saw them. Boxes. All of them mine. Stacked crookedly, carelessly. Some with my name scribbled on them in black marker. Some left open, shirts spilling out. My toolbox dumped onto the floor. My framed photo of my wife lying face down on a dusty shelf. Her quilt, the last thing she made with her trembling hands, tossed over a lawnmower like a dirty rag. For a moment, the world tilted. My throat tightened and a burn crawled up behind my eyes. I reached out and steadied myself on a stack of boxes that wobbled like they might collapse. I hadn't felt this kind of humiliation since the days after my wife's funeral, when people kept saying, "You'll be fine," without knowing that grief becomes a second skeleton inside you, heavy, intrusive, impossible to shake loose. And now, standing in the garage, surrounded by the pieces of my life, that feeling returned. Footsteps behind me. I turned. Lindsay stood in the doorway, holding a mug of coffee. She didn't look embarrassed. Not even uncomfortable. She looked satisfied, like someone who had been waiting to explain herself. "Oh," she said, as if discovering me by accident, "you found your things." My things? My voice felt like it belonged to someone else. "Lindsay, why are they here?" She took a slow sip of coffee and leaned against the frame. "We needed the guest room," she said, casually. "Mark works from home now, and we wanted to turn it into an office." I stared at her. "You didn't ask me?" "I didn't think it mattered." The words struck harder than I expected. She didn't say, "You don't matter," but she didn't have to. My fingers curled slightly, the familiar pulse of anger rising, thick, slow, hot. But I kept my voice steady. "This quilt," I said, lifting it gently from the lawnmower. "It was made by Elsie, my wife. It shouldn't be in here." "Oh, come on," she rolled her eyes. "It's just a blanket." "No," I said quietly, "it isn't." She shrugged. "Look, if you live under our roof, you have to be flexible. You should be grateful we're letting you stay here at all. It's not like you have anywhere else to go." Ah, there it was. The humiliation, the dismissal, the assertion of power. I felt it sink into my bones like cold water. But beneath that chill, something else began to move, slow and sure. The old part of me, the part that had lived long enough to know that silence is sometimes the sharpest blade. I folded the quilt carefully and rested it over my arm. "I see." "Well," she continued cheerfully, already turning away, "lunch is at 1. Don't make a mess out here. The garage is already cramped." She disappeared back into the house. I stood among the boxes for a long time after she left. Long enough for the ache to become stillness. Long enough for the humiliation to become clarity. Long enough for me to realize something important. They have no idea who they're underestimating, and I would not tell them, not yet. For now, I simply closed the garage door, holding my wife's quilt against my chest, and whispered into the dim, dusty air, "All right, if the garage is where you want me, then the garage is where I'll begin." I woke up early the next morning, long before sunrise. Old age does that to a man. Sleep slips away from you like an old friend who doesn't bother saying goodbye. I sat up slowly on the narrow cot I dragged into the garage the night before, listening to the quiet hum of the water heater and the occasional creak of the house settling above me. Not my house, I reminded myself. Not anymore. The cold reached up through the concrete floor and into my bones. I pulled my wife's quilt tighter around my shoulders. Even after all these years, it still held a faint scent of lavender and something warmer, something indefinable that no store-bought detergent could ever replicate. It comforted me in a way nothing else in that house did. Light began to seep through the small garage windows. Dust motes drifted through the golden beams like slow-dancing snowflakes. My boxes sat quietly in the corner, some dented, some slumped, all silently accusing. I imagined each box whispering, "You built your life." They boxed it up, and they didn't even ask. A knot twisted in my chest. I wasn't angry, not exactly. Anger is sharp, explosive. What I felt was heavier, a slow dripping poison that sinks into you until you no longer feel like yourself. Still, I got up. I always get up. By the time I entered the kitchen, the house had awakened. The smell of toasted bread, the clatter of dishes, and Lindsay's voice, bright and artificial, the kind of cheerfulness that hides impatience like a wolf hiding in a wool blanket. "Oh," she said when she saw me, "you're up early. Good. We need to go over some changes." "Changes?" I asked, reaching for the kettle. She gently nudged it away. "Actually, we're switching to the electric kettle. The gas one is old-fashioned and takes too long." I paused, not at the kettle, but at the way she touched things that belonged to me, as if reclaiming territory. "Here," she held out a printed sheet, neatly typed, bullet-pointed. A list. House Rules. It was the title that struck me first, like the proclamation of a queen who had just conquered a village. I scanned through the lines. No adjusting the thermostat without permission. No entering the pantry unless assisting with groceries. No cooking unless asked. No TV usage between 6 p.m. and 10 p.m. Please keep all personal belongings within the garage area. Notify us before inviting anyone over. Not that I had invited anyone over in years. Each rule was a small insult dressed in polite wording. I looked up and met her smug little smile. "It's nothing personal," she said, "just to keep things orderly." "It's your house," I murmured. "Exactly." Then she added, "And Mark agrees with all of this." Ah, my son, always eager to avoid conflict, always folding under the weight of someone else's voice. Almost on cue, he walked into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. "Dad, it's temporary," he said quickly, before I even had time to speak. "Just until I adjust to working from home. Lindsay needs quiet during the day. You understand." I did understand, more than he realized. I understood that Lindsay had maneuvered him perfectly. I understood that my son's backbone had softened over the years, worn down by convenience and a desire for peace. I understood that when a daughter-in-law wants control, a son often hands it over with both palms open. Still, I forced a small smile. "I'll follow the rules," I said. Lindsay looked victorious. Mark looked relieved. And I felt myself settling deeper into the quiet, calculating stillness that had followed me since I stepped into that garage. Noah entered the kitchen moments later. "Grandpa!" he exclaimed, running toward me. But Lindsay pulled him back by the shoulder. "Not now, sweetheart," she said sharply. "Grandpa needs to learn the new routine too." He glanced up at me with wide, uncertain eyes. He didn't understand why everything felt different, why grown-ups were tense, why his grandpa suddenly had a shadow behind his smile. "Go get your shoes," she ordered him. After he left, she turned back to me. "Oh," she added, as if remembering something trivial, "I'm throwing out that old armchair of yours today, the brown one. It smells musty, and it clashes with the new theme." I felt the world thin into a single vibrating line. "That chair," I said quietly, "has been with me for 30 years. "Yes, well," she replied, already tapping something into her phone, "I'm sure the trash collectors will appreciate the nostalgia." It wasn't the chair. It wasn't the rules. It wasn't the garage. It was the total lack of humanity, the disregard, the assumption that age makes a man disposable. I stood there silently, hands clasped in front of me, as Lindsay swept out of the kitchen without waiting for a response. Mark cleared his throat nervously. "Dad, she's just organizing," he said. I didn't answer. Instead, I stepped outside, retrieved my chair from the curb, and carried it quietly back into the garage. Its wooden legs scraped the concrete as I set it down amid the boxes of my displaced life. I sat slowly, feeling the familiar grooves of the armrests beneath my fingers. This was who I was, and they wanted it gone. In the dim quiet of the garage, I whispered to myself, a vow, not a threat. I'll remember this. Then I felt the shift inside me. Not anger, not sadness, something steadier, an understanding. People like Lindsay don't just take space, they take control, piece by piece, rule by rule, until the people around them forget that the old man in the garage once carried this whole family on his shoulders. But I hadn't forgotten, and I had no intention of letting them forget either. Not yet. Not until the right moment. Not until I saw exactly what else Lindsay planned to take. Because people like her never stop at one room, or one chair, or one humiliation. They always take more. And when they do, that's when a quiet old man begins to move his own pieces. Lindsay's house rules didn't take long to show their teeth. Over the next week, the rhythm of the household shifted, tightening around me like a belt pulled hole by hole until it squeezes the breath out of you. Every day brought a new reminder that I was no longer considered part of the home, just an old fixture collecting dust in the wrong corner. It started with my morning routines. For as long as I lived with them, I woke early, made a pot of coffee, and sat at the kitchen window watching the sunrise while the house stretched itself awake. Those quiet minutes were my sanctuary. They made me feel present in a place that wasn't mine, but still held pieces of my family. But that morning, when I went to make coffee, I found the beans missing. Not misplaced, not knocked over. Gone. The cabinet where they always sat was empty, stripped, cleaned, reorganized with military precision. Little labels lined the shelves now. Pasta, rice, granola, vitamins, snacks. Not one label said coffee. I opened drawers, checked the counter, even glanced inside the fridge like a fool searching for something he knows he won't find. That was when I heard the click of Lindsay's heels. "Oh," she said casually, "I put your coffee in the garage. It makes the kitchen smell old." The kitchen? Smelled old? My coffee? I stared at her. "Coffee doesn't smell old. Coffee smells like dust," she interrupted with a shrug. "You can brew it in the garage. It's better that way." Better for whom? I didn't answer. Instead, I went to the garage, found the small jar of beans shoved between two boxes, and brewed my morning coffee beside the lawnmower. The first sip tasted like humiliation. But I drank it anyway, because dignity, I learned long ago, is sometimes choosing not to let someone see you crack. Later that day, I tried to watch the evening news. A simple enough thing, one would think, something a man should be allowed to do in his own, well, in his son's home. But the moment I reached for the remote, Lindsay snatched it off the table with a quick, annoyed swipe. "We're watching a show," she said, curling herself up on the couch next to Mark. "I just want to check the headlines." "Well, we don't," she replied without looking at me. My son found his shoes suddenly fascinating. His face folded inward with the same look he always wore during conflict, a man who would rather swallow glass than tell his wife no. "It's only for a minute," I said. "No TV between 6 and 10, she reminded me, gesturing toward the printed sheet of her house rules taped to the wall like a sacred decree. My stomach tightened. "Lindsay," I said, quieter now, "I'm not a child." "Well," she replied sweetly, "then don't act like one." The words slid under my skin like cold needles. I turned and walked back into the garage. From the doorway, I heard the low murmur of the television, followed by her laughter, bright, triumphant, victorious in a way that left a metallic taste on my tongue. That night, lying on my cot, I stared at the exposed beams overhead and realized something important. Lindsay had not rearranged the house. She had rearranged roles. In her mind, she wasn't the daughter-in-law. She wasn't even the homemaker. She was the authority, the gatekeeper, the warden of a household prison she built with charm and pins and rules. And my son? He was her deputy, a quiet, reluctant guard who turned away when things became uncomfortable. The next morning, I found that my laundry basket had been moved again, emptied of my clean clothes, replaced with a note in Lindsay's handwriting. "I'll wash your clothes with ours when you stop using that old detergent. The smell sticks to everything." The smell she was referring to was the scent my wife always used. I'd kept it all these years, partly out of habit, partly because every time I opened the bottle, her memory drifted out gently like a whisper from the past. But apparently, memory wasn't welcome here either. Later that day, as I walked down the hall, I overheard Lindsay talking in a low voice to someone on the phone. "I cannot live like this," she said sharply. "He leaves things everywhere. He moves things back. He's stuck in his ways. And Mark won't do anything unless I push him." A long pause. "No," she whispered, "I'm not trying to be cruel. But we have a child, and another on the way, hopefully. We need space, real space." Another pause. Then, in the smallest voice I had ever heard from her, vulnerable, frayed, cracking along the edges, "I can't afford to get sick again. Not now. Not when we're already behind." I froze. Sick? Behind? I stepped back a little too loudly. Her head snapped toward the hallway. I slipped into the bathroom and shut the door, heart pounding lightly, not from fear, but from the tickle of realization that maybe, just maybe, something more was happening beneath her cruel exterior. Still, excuses don't undo disrespect. They don't untangle cruelty, and they certainly don't unbox a man's life from a garage. Later that afternoon, I spoke to Mark privately. He sat on the patio, scrolling through his phone. "Son," I began gently, "why didn't you tell me Lindsay was struggling?" He blinked. Confusion flickered across his face. "Struggling? What do you mean?" "You know," I said carefully. "Medical bills, stress, fear." His brow furrowed deeper. "Dad, what are you talking about? Lindsay isn't sick. She's fine. We're fine." A lie, or worse, ignorance. Both cut the same. Before I could say more, Lindsay slid the patio door open and stood silhouetted in the frame. "Mark," she said sharply, "the trash won't take itself out." She wasn't talking about trash. She was talking about me. From the corner of my eye, I saw my old armchair sitting safely where I had moved it earlier. A small victory, a reminder that I still existed. I turned back to Mark, who glanced between his wife and me like a boy caught between two playground bullies. "We'll talk later," he whispered. But we wouldn't, because every time he said those words, he meant, "I won't talk until she allows me to." I nodded anyway. Then I walked back to the garage, sat in my rescued armchair, and stared at the boxes holding the pieces of my life. Lindsay thought this was the end of my dignity. But what she didn't know was simple. A lifetime of being underestimated makes a man very, very patient. And patience in the hands of an old man is a loaded weapon. If humiliation has a sound, it's laughter that stops the moment you walk into the room. That's what greeted me late Saturday afternoon when Lindsay's friends came over for what she called a light lunch gathering. I'd heard the doorbell earlier, the clacking heels, the exaggerated greetings. I recognized the tone, women who treated compliments as currency and gossip as entertainment. I planned to stay in the garage, away from the spectacle, but Noah came knocking. "Grandpa," he whispered through the door, "Mom says you shouldn't come out right now, but I saved you a cookie." A small hand slid a napkin under the crack, one chocolate chip cookie nestled like a tiny act of rebellion. The sweetness of it made my throat tighten. I opened the door and crouched down to his level. "Thank you, Noah." He grinned, missing one front tooth. "I like when you're in the house. It feels warmer." Children have a way of stating truths adults are too proud to admit. I ruffled his hair before sending him back. I would have stayed hidden like Lindsay wanted, until I heard my name. Or rather, my role. "Well, at least we have space now," Lindsay said loudly enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. It was impossible with him in the guest room, clutter everywhere, and the smell. Old people just have a smell, you know. My stomach dropped. One of her friends murmured something sympathetic, the way people do when they want to encourage cruelty without being caught participating. Another added lightly, "I don't know how you manage. I could never live with someone else's parent." Lindsay sighed dramatically. "Exactly. It's exhausting, constantly picking up after him, reminding him of rules. He forgets everything. Honestly, the garage is better for everyone." Laughter, soft, coated in sugar, poisonous. And there it was, the same hot pulse I felt the day she moved my belongings. Slow, heavy, building. I stepped into the house quietly, not announcing myself. I walked down the hall with measured steps. Each footfall felt like dropping a small stone into a still lake. When I turned into the dining room, conversation halted mid-breath. 4 faces froze. Lindsay's eyes widened for a split second before she forced a tight, brittle smile. "Oh, you're up." She stood quickly, smoothing her blouse. "We didn't think you'd be joining us." Her friends shifted uncomfortably, their expressions slipping into polite masks. They weren't cruel, just cowards. People who wouldn't dare shame an old man unless someone braver or colder led the charge. I nodded at them politely. "I heard guests," I said softly. "I came to say hello." One woman murmured, "That's sweet," with an awkward laugh. Another offered a stiff smile. But Lindsay's jaw tightened. I could see the annoyance ripple through her like a cold breeze. She didn't want me here. She wanted me invisible. She wanted me gone. I took a seat at the far end of the table, my old place, though the chair had been replaced by one that didn't quite match. I rested my hands on the polished wood and looked around. "Smells nice in here," I said. Lindsay's face twitched. One of her friends quickly asked, "So, how long have you been living with them?" Before I could reply, Lindsay jumped in. "Oh, he's been with us for a while. We're doing our best, you know. Taking care of the elderly is such a responsibility." My eyebrows lifted. Taking care of me? I had bathed myself, fed myself, walked miles every day. She hadn't so much as washed one of my shirts without complaining. But in front of her friends, she painted herself as a martyr carrying a burden. "Lindsay," I said quietly, "I'm still capable." A faint blush spread on her cheeks. Embarrassment or irritation? Of course," she said quickly. Then, without thinking, she added loudly, "We just need the space for more important things." The room stilled again. More important things? More than me? Than my memories? Than the room I'd filled with pieces of my life? One of her friends cleared her throat delicately. "I actually thought that quilt in the garage was beautiful. Such craftsmanship." Lindsay winced, then forced a laugh. "Oh, that thing. It's sentimental, I guess, but it's old and dusty." I felt the heat crawl up my spine. "That quilt," I said gently, "was the last thing my wife made before she passed. She knitted it while she could barely hold the needles." Silence. Sudden, heavy, embarrassed. Even her friends looked horrified. Lindsay's smile shattered. She stammered, I didn't mean." But the damage was done. She had exposed herself, unintentionally, as someone who discarded not just belongings, but memories, legacy, love. Mark entered then, holding plates. He took one look at the faces in the room and froze. "What's going on?" he asked. Before anyone else could speak, I gave him a soft smile, a tired one. "Your wife was just explaining her house rules." He frowned. "Dad, Lindsay cut him off sharply. "Don't start. We talked about this." They exchanged a quiet argument with their eyes. Hers sharp and panicked, his dull and helpless. Their guests suddenly realized they were witnessing something they shouldn't. One by one, they collected their purses and jackets, offering quick goodbyes. As the door closed behind the last woman, the quiet that followed was louder than any shouting match. Mark sighed. "Lindsay, did you say something?" "Oh, please," she snapped. "Your father is being dramatic. I didn't say anything untrue." I looked at her, really looked. Her eyes were swollen, rimmed with a faint redness. Not from anger, from exhaustion, maybe even crying earlier. She held herself with a tension that suggested something pressing down on her chest. Fear, perhaps, worry, something heavier than me or my boxes. But fear doesn't excuse cruelty. I stood slowly. My joints protested the sudden movement, but dignity steadied me. "Lindsay," I said softly, "you didn't need to embarrass me today." Her lips pressed into a thin, defensive line. "Well, maybe you shouldn't." "I'm not fighting with you," I interrupted gently. "I'm only saying this. People's words reveal more about themselves than the ones they're aimed at." She blanked. The defensiveness faded just enough for uncertainty to slip through. Mark opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it. I walked toward the garage door, but paused before stepping through. "You may move my belongings," I said quietly, "but not my memory, and not my place in this family." Then I entered the garage and closed the door. Inside, the silence wrapped around me, but not the defeated kind, a sharper one, a planning one, the kind of silence that comes just before an old man decides exactly how he'll reclaim the space someone stole from him. That night, the house settled into an uneasy stillness, one thicker than the usual quiet, the kind of stillness that happens after a storm hasn't quite passed, when the sky holds its breath before deciding whether to break open or clear away. I lay awake on my narrow cot in the garage, staring up at the rafters. A spider crawled along a web in the corner, delicate and unbothered by the world collapsing beneath it. I envied it for a moment, its simple life, its unchallenged place in the universe. No one would dare move a spider to the garage. That was its home. My home, apparently, was here too. I turned on my side, wincing as the cot groaned under me, and closed my eyes. But sleep didn't come. Instead, a whisper of sound drifted through the wall from the kitchen, muffled, fragile, out of place. A sob, soft but unmistakable. Lindsay. I sat up, heart thrumming slower and heavier. Curiosity is a strange thing at my age, less nosy, more observant. You start to understand that people rarely behave cruelly without a reason, even if the reason is ugly, selfish, or soaked in fear. I slipped quietly into the kitchen. The overhead light was off, but the under-cabinet glow cast a pale ribbon across the counter. Lindsay sat at the table, shoulders hunched, elbows on the wood, her head in her hands. Beside her was a stack of papers, envelopes, bills, printed forms, some stamped in bright red ink. Overdue, payment required, final notice. She didn't hear me at first. Her breath hitched, uneven and strained. I watched her for a moment, not out of pity, not out of satisfaction, but out of understanding. Life had a way of cornering people until they lashed out at the nearest target, and I was an easy one. Only when her body shook did I clear my throat softly. She stiffened. Her head snapped up, eyes red and glassy, mascara smudged beneath them. "Oh," she said, hurriedly wiping her face, "it's you." "That it is." She sniffed and straightened, trying to regain the cold composure she wore like armor. "Do you need something?" she asked sharply, though her voice came out thin. I looked at the papers spread across the table. She tried to gather them quickly, but I raised a hand. "I'm not here to judge," I said. Her jaw tightened. "Well, good, because it's none of your business." "Perhaps not," I agreed softly. "But pain has a way of overflowing, Lindsay, and today a lot of it spilled in my direction." She deflated then, just a little. The fight in her posture faltered, replaced by something raw. "You wouldn't understand," she muttered, staring at the table. "Try me." She hesitated. The silence stretched, long and taut, like a thread pulled to its breaking point. Finally, she exhaled. "I have medical debt," she whispered. I nodded, though it wasn't news to me. "And Mark doesn't know," she added. That part was news, though not surprising. I'd noticed him panicking about small expenses lately, quietly reducing grocery spending, skipping lunches out. But this was deeper. He was trying to hold the roof up without knowing the foundation underneath was already cracking. "What about insurance?" I asked gently. Her face twisted. "Denied, because I went out of network once, one time, but I had to. I was sick, and the closest doctor who could see me was—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "It doesn't matter." "And the bills?" I asked. "They keep coming, and I can't tell Mark. He'll fall apart if he knows how much trouble we're actually in." Her shoulders shook again. "I thought if I could get this house reorganized, if I could make space, if I could control something, then maybe everything else would feel manageable." There it was. Her cruelty wasn't just cruelty. It was panic, wearing anger like a mask, fear dressed up as dominance, a woman drowning, pulling down anything that floated near her. But that didn't change the fact that she had thrown my life into the garage. "You should have told him," I said. Her eyes flashed. "I can't. Mark doesn't handle stress well. He'll crumble, and then I'll have two people to take care of." I leaned against the counter, letting her words settle. "A marriage built on secrets," I murmured, "sinks faster than a marriage built on debt." She flinched. I didn't press further. Instead, I looked at her the way I might look at a stranger who wandered into the wrong story, lost, scared, but still responsible for their choices. She gathered the papers with shaking hands. "Please don't tell him," she whispered. "I won't," I said. Her head jerked up, surprised. "But hear me," I continued. "Pain does not excuse cruelty. You threw away things that weren't yours to move. You belittled me, embarrassed me, and in front of your friends, you carved pieces out of my dignity." Her face crumpled, shame creeping through the cracks of her composure. "I know," she whispered. "I know, and I hate myself for it. I didn't know how else to stop everything from falling apart." For the first time since I'd known her, Lindsay looked small, human, breakable. I stepped toward the table and reached gently for the top envelope. She let me. Medical bill after medical bill. Numbers that would break a young couple already scraping by. Numbers that could crush a household. "You're carrying a heavy load," I said. "I am," she whispered. "Let me carry some of it with you." Her eyes widened in fear. "No, Number, I don't want your pity." "This isn't pity," I said. "It's family." The words struck her like a blow. She closed her eyes, tears running silently. "I don't deserve kindness," she whispered. "No," I agreed, "not after what you did." Her eyes snapped open, startled by my honesty. "But kindness," I continued, "isn't about deserving. It's about choosing who we are when others fall apart." A long silence stretched between us. Finally, she whispered, "I'm sorry." It wasn't much, but it was the first brick removed from the wall she'd built. I nodded slowly, accepting her apology, not forgiving yet, but acknowledging it. Then I placed the envelopes back on the table, one by one, and stepped toward the garage door. Before leaving, I said, "Lindsay, you moved my belongings to the garage because you needed space, but maybe what you actually needed was help." She said nothing, and I returned to the garage with a new understanding and a new resolve. Because now I knew what she was hiding, and I knew that the day would come when she'd need more than space. She'd need something only I could give, or take away. Some moments in life slip quietly into the bloodstream, unnoticed until they suddenly flare into something undeniable. That night in the kitchen, seeing Lindsay's panic, her shame, her tears, was one of those moments. It didn't erase what she'd done. It didn't soften the sting of my belongings exiled to the garage. But it changed something inside me, like a compass, needle twitching toward a new direction. Still, the next morning delivered a hard reminder. Remorse rarely lasts when pride wakes up. I found out just how quickly when I heard shouting from inside the house. Two voices, one sharp, one desperate, and one very small, trembling voice caught in the middle. Noah. I pushed open the garage door and stepped into the hallway. The sound became clearer. "No, you cannot bring that back inside." Lindsay's voice cracked with frustration. "But Grandpa gave it to me," Noah cried, "and it's mine." I hurried toward the commotion and arrived at the living room doorway just in time to see Lindsay snatch the worn wooden toy train from Noah's hands, one I'd carved by hand decades ago for Mark when he was 5. "Stop it!" Noah wailed, reaching for it. Lindsay held it high, out of his reach. "It's dirty, it's old, and it was in the garage. I don't want that stuff inside the house." My heart clenched. Not just because it was my handmade gift, not just because Noah was crying, but because I saw in one snapshot the generational chain of cruelty handed down not intentionally, but through carelessness, through control, through fear disguised as order. "Lindsay," I said quietly. She froze, shoulders tensing. Slowly, she turned toward me, face flushed, hair disheveled from frustration. "Oh, you're here," she said, as if I'd interrupted a meeting rather than a meltdown. Noah rushed to me and buried his face in my side. I rested my hand on his back, feeling his little body trembling. "Give him the train," I said calmly. Lindsay crossed her arms, a defensive stance. "It's filthy, and it doesn't belong." "It belongs to him," I repeated. She hesitated, torn between authority and exhaustion. Mark entered then, drawn by the shouting. "What's going on?" he asked. Lindsay spun toward him. "Your father is interfering again!" I exhaled slowly. She had snapped back into her old pattern. The apology from last night had vanished like mist burned off by morning sun. "Interfering?" I asked gently. "By asking you not to take a crying child's toy?" "It was in the garage," she snapped. "Everything from the garage stays in the garage. We need order. We need structure. We need—" "You need control," I whispered. Her shoulders jerked as if I'd slapped her. Mark's brow furrowed. Linz, maybe he's right. Maybe we're being too strict. Lindsay whipped around to him. Too strict? Mark, you never take my side. I always take your side, he said, his voice small and defeated. I felt a pang of sorrow. My son, once confident, once steady, now a man walking on eggshells in his own home. Please, Lindsay murmured, pressing her palms into her eyes, I can't do this today. I can't. She sat heavily on the couch, shoulders shaking. It's too much. Everything is too much. Mark knelt beside her, alarmed. Linz, are you okay? She didn't answer. Her breathing grew rapid and shallow, borderline hyperventilation. A panic attack. I recognized it immediately. My wife used to get them in the last months of her treatment, when fear built too fast, too high, until it squeezed the air out of her. Without thinking, I stepped forward. Lindsay, I said softly, look at me. She did, eyes wide and unfocused. Breathe with me, I said, inhaling slowly, deeply. She mirrored me, shaky but willing. Inhale, exhale. The room fell silent except for our breaths sinking gradually, like two mismatched clocks learning to tick together. Noah watched, wide-eyed. Mark hovered helplessly. Finally, Lindsay's breaths steadied. Her shoulders relaxed. She blinked several times as if surfacing from underwater. I'm sorry, she whispered. Mark let out a long, relieved sigh. You scared me. She didn't lean into him, didn't reach for his hand. Instead, she looked at me, really looked, and for a flicker of a moment, gratitude crossed her face before panic chased it away again. I'm trying, she said weakly. I'm trying so hard, and I keep failing. No one said you had to try alone, I murmured. Her face crumpled. I don't want to need help. I nodded. Most people don't, until they don't have a choice. She pressed her lips together. I just want things clean, organized, predictable. I want one thing in my life that doesn't fall apart. I glanced around the living room, spotless, curated, everything in its place, except the people who were fraying at the edges. Predictability, control, fear. But fear doesn't justify cruelty, and I couldn't let that go unaddressed. Lindsay, I said softly, you can't manage your fear by hurting the people around you. Her eyes widened, and she looked away quickly, as if the truth burned her. I reached down and picked up the wooden train from the floor. I handed it to Noah, whose small fingers curled around it tightly. This stays with him, I said, in the house. Lindsay shut her eyes, a pained expression crossing her face, not defiant this time, but ashamed. She whispered, barely audible, okay. But it was too late for small surrenders. Something bigger was unraveling. I knew it. She knew it. And Mark, lost, confused, loyal to a fault, felt it pulling at him too. Hours later, after the house had settled again, I found myself in the garage, sitting in my old armchair, as dusk poured through the windows like thinning honey. I replayed the afternoon in my mind, each detail stitching itself into a tapestry of realization. Lindsay was collapsing under the weight of her secrets. Mark was collapsing under the weight of her expectations. Noah was collapsing under the tension swirling around him. And me? I was the only one in the house who saw all three threads clearly. But that clarity came with a responsibility. I needed to understand just how deep Lindsay's struggles went. I needed to know whether she was cruel or simply cornered. But most importantly, I needed to be ready. Because people who feel their world slipping tend to grab onto anything within reach. And sometimes they reach for the wrong thing. Sometimes something you love, something you need, something you must protect at all costs. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. The storm wasn't over. In fact, it hadn't even truly begun. The morning after Lindsay's panic attack arrived with a strange, uneasy calm, the kind of quiet that feels borrowed, like it could be snatched away at any moment. Sunlight crept through the kitchen windows in thin golden slashes, illuminating dust in the air. The house seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see which version of Lindsay would emerge today, the brittle tyrant or the frightened woman beneath. I found her at the dining table, hunched over a laptop, fingers tapping anxiously against the trackpad. Her shoulders stiffened when she heard me approach. She didn't look up when she spoke. "Before you say anything," she murmured, "I meant what I said yesterday. I'm sorry." I stood there a moment before answering. The apology hung between us like a bridge only half built. "Thank you," I said, letting my voice carry a gentleness I wasn't sure I entirely felt. It meant something. She nodded faintly, still not lifting her eyes. Mark entered then, hair uncombed, shirt wrinkled, clutching his travel mug like a man clinging to a lifeline. He kissed Lindsay's head. She flinched, barely noticeable, but enough for me to see. "Morning," he muttered, then glanced at me. "Dad, can we talk later? There's something I need to go over with you." His voice carried a heaviness I hadn't heard in a long time. Of course. He left quickly, like he always did when emotions threatened to surface. When the door shut behind him, Lindsay finally looked up at me. Her eyes were puffy, ringed with exhaustion. She seemed smaller today, fragile, like a porcelain cup someone had dropped and tried to glue back together. "I need to ask you something," she said. Her fingers trembled as she closed her laptop. I sat across from her, folding my hands carefully in my lap. "What is it?" She hesitated, chewing the inside of her cheek. The storm behind her eyes was gathering again. Shame, worry, fear of vulnerability. "About money," she whispered. I waited. Her chin quivered. She took a shaky breath. "We're behind, more than Mark knows. I want to tell him, I do, but I'm scared it'll break him. And we can't afford the procedure I need, not with the out-of-pocket costs, not with our debt." Her voice cracked at the word procedure. She looked down, twisting her wedding ring anxiously. "I found some documents in the garage," she confessed, voice shrinking. "Financial papers, your name on bank statements, old tax forms, your pension." A small jolt of surprise ran through me. She'd gone through my boxes. But I didn't react, not outwardly. Her face flushed with embarrassment. "I didn't go looking for them. They fell out when I was moving things, and I saw your numbers, and I saw—" She swallowed hard. "You're not broke," she whispered. "You have money, real money." I felt no urgency to answer. Silence can force truth to spill. She rushed on, words tumbling out. "I need help, just this once. I'll pay everything back, I swear it. I can't let Mark drown in this. And Noah, he deserves stability, not a sick mother or a house full of stress." Her breath hitched sharply. "I know I've treated you terribly," she said. "I know I don't deserve anything from you. But please, tell me if you can help, even a little." For a moment, I let the weight of her words settle. The desperation, the admission, the humility. Forced, yes, but genuine underneath. But something deeper gnawed at me. She needed money, that was clear. But what about trust, respect, family? Those she hadn't asked for. And I wasn't going to cheapen my dignity, not now, by pretending her apology erased her actions. I leaned forward slightly. "Lindsay," I said gently, "how long have you known?" "Since last night," she whispered. "After you went to the garage, I kept thinking about what you said, about not having to be alone." "And then I checked one of the boxes for something of Noah's, and the papers fell out." I nodded slowly. "And you came to me," I said, "because you need money." She closed her eyes. A tear slid down her cheek. "Yes," she whispered. I sat back. The truth of it burned, quiet, steady. I was only valuable to her now because she needed something, not because she regretted the garage, not because she suddenly respected me, but because desperation pushed her toward humility she wouldn't have chosen on her own. I breathed in slowly, letting the air sit a moment before I spoke. "I will not give you money." Her head jerked up, eyes wide, not angry, terrified. I didn't mean, I wasn't trying to—" She choked on the words, panic rising fast. "I know I don't deserve, I just don't know what else to do." "Lindsay," I said calmly, "look at me." She did. "Money isn't what you need from me." Confusion twisted her expression. "What do you mean?" "You need honesty," I said. "You need partnership with your husband. You need to stop carrying fear like a shield and swinging it at the people closest to you." Her lip trembled. "But most of all," I continued, "you need to stop treating me like a burden and start treating me like family." Her face cracked open, not literally, but emotionally, every brittle defense breaking at once. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, this time not out of panic, but truth. I nodded. "But hear me," I said softly. "I'll help you, but not with secrets, not with lies, and not until this house changes." She blinked, stunned. "Changes?" she asked faintly. "Yes," I said. "You asked me for help. Now I'm asking you for something in return." Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "What is it?" I stood slowly, letting my knees straighten with a small groan. "You'll know," I said, "when the time comes." She swallowed hard. I turned toward the garage door. But before stepping through, I paused. "One more thing." She looked up, tense. "If you ever move my belongings without asking again," I said softly, "I'll move something of yours." Her breath caught. She knew I meant it. But she didn't yet know what I would move. Not yet. But she would. Soon. And when that moment came, it wouldn't be out of anger, but out of balance. Some people think power shifts happen in a single moment. One argument, one revelation, one explosion. But in real life, power doesn't flip like a switch. It tilts. Slowly, quietly, degree by degree, until suddenly the person who once towered over you looks up and realizes the ground has moved beneath their feet. That tilt began the following afternoon. The house was unusually still. Mark had taken Noah to soccer practice. Lindsay remained at home, but she drifted from room to room like a ghost, touching the back of a chair, straightening a picture frame, wiping an already clean counter. Her mind was elsewhere, trapped beneath the weight of fear she had kept hidden for too long. I kept a respectful distance, sitting in the living room, pretending to read the newspaper. Really, I was watching, observing, learning the shape of her worry. Her phone buzzed 3 times in 10 minutes. Each time she flinched, snatched it up, read the screen, then set it down with trembling fingers.
Medical bills don't stop for grief or pride. They don't pause while you regain your composure. I waited until she walked into the hallway before I stood and went to refill my water. That's when I noticed an envelope on the corner of the counter, a fresh one, unopened, stamped with red ink, "Final Insurance Determination." I didn't touch it, but the sight alone told me what I needed to know. Lindsay re-entered the kitchen and froze when she saw me standing near the counter. For a heartbeat, she panicked, eyes darting to the envelope. Then she steadied herself, drawing her shoulders back. "It's nothing," she said softly. I didn't call out her lie. Sometimes the silence after a lie is more revealing than the truth. Instead, I asked, "Where's Mark?" "With Noah. He'll be back soon." I nodded. "What about your appointment on Thursday?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I canceled it." "Canceled?" I asked, though I already knew why. Her throat bobbed. "We can't afford it." I felt something inside me settle, not anger, not pity, but a kind of solemn understanding. A man who's lived long enough recognizes the difference between selfish cruelty and desperation disguised as righteousness. But knowing doesn't always mean forgiving. "You need treatment," I said. "We need money," she countered. "And your son needs a mother," I replied. Her face crumpled. She sank into a chair as if her bones had suddenly turned to water. "I don't know what to do anymore," she whispered, fingers shaking as she wiped her eyes. "Everything is slipping. I'm trying to hold it together, but—" She broke off suddenly, bending forward as if the pressure inside her chest had finally become too heavy. I spoke gently. "You need to tell Mark the truth." Her head jerked up. "No, he'll panic. He'll think he failed. He'll blame himself." "And what happens," I asked, "when the bills grow larger, when the treatments become urgent, when your health collapses and he finds out too late?" Her face went pale, as if I'd stepped into her deepest, darkest fear and handed it to her.
You can't keep secrets from the people you rely on, I said. It's like building a house on sand. Her eyes were glassy, terrified. Please, don't tell him. Let me tell him when I'm ready. I didn't agree. I didn't disagree. I simply let the silence breathe between us. Because something else had taken root in my mind. Something I'd been quietly observing for weeks. The house was not built on sand. Their marriage was. The secret medical debt, the fragile trust, the emotional distance, the panic she hid with hostility, and Mark, poor boy, walking blindfolded through a minefield he didn't even know existed. Lindsay, I said gently, your husband should stand beside you, not behind you. Before she could respond, a door slammed. We both froze. Footsteps, heavy ones. Mark walked in, carrying Noah in one arm and his gym bag in the other. His hair was plastered with sweat. He looked tired and stressed in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. "What's going on?" he asked, glancing between us. Lindsay straightened immediately, too quickly, too defensively. "Nothing," she said. "We were just talking." But Mark saw the redness in her eyes, the tension in the air, and the envelope on the counter. "What's that?" he asked. Lindsay's breath caught. "It's nothing, just mail." Mark reached for it. She grabbed his hand. Too fast, too desperate. He stared at her, stunned. "Lindsay," he said slowly, "what's going on?" Her lips parted, but no words came out. Panic and shame warred across her face. I could have stepped in then. I could have smoothed the edges, redirected the tension, saved her from the collapse that was coming. But some truths must break open to be rebuilt. So I said nothing, not as a punishment, but as a catalyst. Mark gently pulled the envelope from her hand. He opened it. He read. His face drained of color. "Lindsay, what is this?" She folded in on herself. I didn't want to worry you." "This says they denied the claim again," he said, voice rising. "This says you're past due on payments. This says—" his voice cracked. "This says your treatment is urgent. Lindsay, why didn't you tell me?" She broke then, completely. "I was scared," she sobbed. "I didn't know how to tell you. We're drowning, Mark, and I thought if I could just keep the house perfect, if I could control something, maybe you wouldn't see how terrified I am." Mark dropped into the chair beside her. His hand hovered above hers, trembling. Noah watched from the hallway, eyes wide with confusion. I knelt beside him. "It's okay," I murmured. "Your mom and dad are talking." He leaned into me, small and warm and trusting. Inside the kitchen, Mark finally reached for Lindsay's hand. "Why didn't you trust me?" he whispered. She sobbed harder. "I didn't want you to think I failed." "You didn't fail," he said. "You're sick. That's not failure." The air around them shifted, not healed, not whole, but cracked open. Truth tends to do that. But truth also leaves debris, broken expectations, broken assumptions, broken illusions. And someone would need to clean that debris up. Someone who saw everything. Someone who understood what came next. Someone who had been underestimated for far too long. That someone was me. As Noah leaned into my side and Mark held his shaking life, a strange calm settled over me. The moment I'd been waiting for had arrived. The moment when the family realized how fragile their foundation truly was. And soon, very soon, they would realize just how much they needed the old man in the garage. The house felt different the next morning, hushed, tender, bruised in the way families are after a night of truth-telling. Conversations had been whispered behind closed doors, tears had been shed, apologies murmured. But nothing had been resolved yet. Truth doesn't end conflict, it begins it. And I knew we were only at the beginning. I woke early, partly out of habit, partly because the garage doesn't let a man sleep deeply. My back ached from the cot, my joints crackled as I stood. Outside, dawn was just beginning to tint the sky with soft gray blue. But today, I didn't feel small, or forgotten, or boxed up. Today, I felt clarity. a kind of stillness one gets when the world finally admits it's been teetering on the edge of collapse, and you are the only one with steady footing. I stepped into the house quietly.
The kitchen smelled of stale coffee and stress. Dishes sat unwashed in the sink, a rare crack in Lindsay's immaculate armor. She was nowhere in sight, but a blanket lay folded on the couch, suggesting she had barely slept. Mark's office door was closed. A soft murmur inside told me he was on a call, his voice low, strained. But Noah was awake. He sat at the table drawing, legs swinging. When he saw me, he lit up like sunrise itself. "Grandpa!" He scrambled down from the chair. I caught him mid-run and lifted him into a hug. My joints protested, but my heart didn't. "You okay, kiddo?" I asked softly. He nodded, leaning his head on my shoulder. "Mommy cried last night." "I know," I said. "Sometimes grown-ups need to cry." He looked up at me. "Is everything going to be okay?" I held him a little tighter. "Yes," I said firmly, "but some things need fixing first." He accepted that with the wholehearted trust only children can give, then wriggled to get down. "Come see my drawing." I followed him, but halfway across the kitchen I stopped. The guest room door was open. The room I once lived in. The room she emptied without a word. The room that had been claimed by someone who had no right to claim it. And something inside me hardened. Not with anger, but with purpose. It was time. Time to do what I'd warned Lindsay of. Time to show her what it felt like when something precious was moved. Not stolen, not damaged, just moved. By someone who believed they had the right. But first, I needed to make sure the moment would cut deeply enough to make an impression, and gently enough not to harm. The perfect balance. I walked toward the hallway where Lindsay's voice floated from the bedroom, strained, exhausted. "Mark, it's not that simple. They denied it again. We need to figure out something." "It is simple," Mark answered, his voice thick with worry. "You should have told me sooner. We're going to fix this. We'll find a way." A pause. "Even if we have to sell the car." Lindsay gasped. "Mark, the car is—" But I didn't stay to hear the rest, because I already knew what I needed to do. I went to the garage, stood among my boxes, let the memory of that humiliation settle once more. Then I looked to the corner where Lindsay's medical equipment sat, neatly arranged in bins, labeled and organized with the same compulsive need to control that had driven her to exile my life into this dusty room. This equipment wasn't just important, it was essential, but not fragile, not in danger, not at risk of damage, just relocatable. I picked up the first bin. It was lighter than I expected, filled with bandages, compression wraps, small devices. I carried it inside the house, my steps slow, deliberate. The second bin held her nebulizer, backup power pack, and a folder of medical instructions. I carried that as well. The third was heavier, containing the device she needed during episodes. I cradled it carefully, respectfully. Then I brought all 3 bins to the master bedroom and placed them beside her bed. Not thrown, not hidden, not damaged. Moved. Back into the home where they belonged. Into the center of the life she was terrified to lose. Into the space she had once insisted was hers alone. Then I stepped back and looked at my work. Balanced, symbolic, undeniable. A perfect reflection of her actions. I returned to the hallway, straightened my posture, and knocked gently on the master bedroom door. Lindsay opened it, eyes swollen, cheeks streaked with dried tears. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, fragile but still clinging to a brittle pride. She blinked when she saw me. "Yes?" I stepped aside so she could see behind me. Her body tensed, breath caught, eyes widened. She saw the bins, her medical supplies, her vulnerability laid out openly, in the space she considered her own sanctuary. Exactly how she had laid out my life in the cold garage.
Her lips parted. "Why did you bring those in here?" I looked at her steadily. "You needed the space," I said softly. "The garage isn't suited for things that are important." Her throat bobbed. I continued. "You moved my belongings because you thought they didn't belong in the home." She closed her eyes, pain flashing across her face. "And now," I said gently, "I've moved something of yours into the room where it belongs. Not to hurt you, not to shame you, but to show you something." Tears welled instantly. "That's what it felt like," I said, "when my life was boxed up and pushed aside." She covered her mouth with trembling fingers. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered. "But you did," I replied softly, "because you were overwhelmed, afraid, trying to control something, anything." She broke then, completely, sinking onto the bed with a sob that echoed through the room. Mark stared at the bins, then at me. Understanding dawned slowly in his eyes. "You moved these?" he said quietly. "Yes." "Why?" he whispered, though he already knew. "So she would understand," I answered. He nodded, swallowing hard. Then he looked at Lindsay. "We fix this together now. No more secrets." She collapsed into his arms. I stepped back into the hallway, giving them space, but not leaving entirely, because the balance had shifted. The moment had come, and all three of us knew. This house would never treat me the same way again, not after today. There's a certain quiet that settles over a house after the truth has torn through it. A quiet not of peace, but of rebuilding. Like the air after a storm when the clouds are still heavy, but the wind has softened, and everything waits for someone to make the first move toward repair. That morning, I waited in the hallway while Mark held Lindsay on the edge of their bed. They whispered to each other. Real whispers, tender ones, not the hushed arguments that had filled this house for months. Words like, "I'm sorry," and "I was scared," and "I didn't want to lose you," floated out through the doorway. And beneath all of it was the soft sound of something loosening. Guilt, fear, pride. When their voices finally grew still, I stepped back into the living room. Noah was building a tower of blocks, humming softly in that way children do when they sense something monumental has happened but don't quite understand it. He glanced up at me. "Grandpa?" "Yes, buddy." "Is Mommy okay?" "Yes," I said gently. "She will be." "And Daddy?" "He will be too." He nodded, satisfied, and continued stacking blocks. When Mark and Lindsay emerged a few minutes later, their faces were swollen from crying, but their eyes looked clearer, like the fog inside them had lifted just a little. "Dad," Mark said, his voice thick with emotion, "can we talk?" I nodded, though I knew this wasn't going to be their talk. It was going to be mine. We sat at the dining table, me at the head, the two of them beside each other, their hands intertwined, a sight I hadn't seen in months. Lindsay couldn't meet my eyes at first. She fiddled with the edge of her sleeve, shoulders curled inward. "Dad," Mark began, then paused, trying to gather words that had clearly been buried for too long. "We didn't treat you right." I stayed quiet. "You've done everything for us," he continued. "You helped us buy this house. You raised me alone after Mom died. You've supported us in every way, and we repaid you by—" His voice broke. "By making you feel unwelcome in your own family." Lindsay's breath hitched. "I was cruel," she whispered. "I was drowning and trying to keep myself afloat by pushing you down. That's not an excuse, but it's the truth." I nodded slowly. "I know why you did it," I said softly. "Fear makes us do ugly things, and you've been carrying fears no one else saw." She wiped her cheek. "But," I continued, "understanding doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't undo the hurt, and it doesn't rebuild trust." She winced. "I know. But it can start rebuilding." They both looked up then, hope flickering timidly in their eyes. "I'm willing to help," I said, "but under conditions." Mark straightened. "Anything?" Lindsay swallowed hard. "Name them." I leaned forward slightly, folding my hands atop the table. First, I said, the guest room is mine again, permanently. Not because I want space, but because I deserve dignity. Lindsay nodded without hesitation. It's yours. Second, I continued, there will be no more secret house rules. If something bothers you, we discuss it like family, not dictators. Another nod. Third, I said, my voice steadying, you will tell me when you're drowning. I'm too old to guess at shadows. Lindsay's chin trembled. I will. And finally, I said, I will help financially with your medical treatment. All of it. Lindsay gasped. A small, fragile sound. Mark stared at me, stunned. Dad, what? No, that's too much. We can't let you. You're not letting me, I interrupted gently. I'm offering. Because your wife needs help. Because Noah needs a mother. And because I refuse to sit in a garage watching my family crumble when I have the means to keep it standing. Tears spilled over Lindsay's cheeks. But, I added, this help comes with one last requirement. She looked up, bracing. You too take care of your marriage, I said. Not with rules, not with appearances, not with spotless counters or perfect schedules, but with honesty, because secrets turn families into strangers. Mark exhaled shakily. We can do that. Lindsay wiped her tears. We will. The weight in the room shifted. Something heavy lifting, something lighter taking its place. I stood slowly. My back cracked in protest, but my heart felt steady. Good, I said. Then, let's begin. The rest of the day unfolded differently from any day that had preceded it. Mark cleared out the guest room himself, quietly, reverently, placing my belongings back exactly where they'd been.
He carried each photo frame as if it were made of porcelain. He refolded my clothes, dusted the dresser, even polished the wooden box holding my wife's watch. Lindsay joined him halfway through. She picked up my wife's quilt with trembling hands, pressing it to her chest in a gesture that wasn't dramatic, but deeply human. I'm so sorry, she whispered to the quilt, maybe to me, maybe to the woman who had knitted it. Later, she helped me make the bed. Not as a servant, not as a penance, but as a daughter-in-law trying to build something new in a house that had finally admitted its fractures. That night, as they prepared dinner together, laughing in small, tender bursts, Lindsay looked over at me. Would you like to watch the news tonight? She asked. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't an apology dressed in formality. It was simply respectful. Yes, I said, I would. And so I did. Sitting in my old armchair, the family gathered around me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged in the home I helped build. Later, as I returned to my room, I paused at the doorway. The quilt lay across the bed. The photos stood where they once had. The air smelled faintly of the lavender detergent my wife loved. It felt like returning to myself. I sat on the edge of the mattress, letting the comfort settle over me. I thought of something then, something important enough to put into words. People often say that elders should stay quiet, stay small, be grateful for whatever scraps of space they're given. But they forget something. We've survived too much to be treated like shadows. We've carried too much to be stored in garages. And we've earned the right to be heard. I lay back, closing my eyes. Lindsay was getting the treatment she needed. Mark was carrying the truth instead of pretending not to see it. Noah was safe, calm, happy. And the family, it was healing, slowly. Finally. I kept one thing from the garage, though, my old armchair. Not because I needed it, but because it reminded me of what it means to survive in dignity and rise from it with both strength and mercy. After all, quiet men are often mistaken for weak men. But quiet is just the space where wisdom grows teeth. And mine had finally bitten back with just enough force to be remembered and just enough kindness to be respected.